Have you ever wondered about a closer relationship with God? Have you ever thought about how that is possible? Well, this evening for our study, we are going to look at Psalms 42, verses 1 to 5. And in this psalm, we find the psalmist praying a prayer for the presence of God. We're going to look at it and then we're going to see if we can draw some things from it that are going to be important for us to understand. First of all, the psalm begins with the choir master, a maskil of the sons of Korah. So I want to take a little time to look at the title, this title that is found here. First, we find that the psalm is a maskil, which is a didactic poem, a psalm of wisdom, if you please. And then it says that the sons of Korah are the author of the psalm. Well, there are some different theories on that. Well, the sons of Korah were temple musicians. I don't know if you remember that they are related to Moses. And they were responsible for putting together some songs from the oral tradition. That's what some people believe. So that what that means is that some of the psalms that are written, that is said to be written by Korah, really might be just songs in the popular oral tradition, and therefore they are the ones putting it together and responsible for it. That's a very interesting theory, though, because in many ways, some of our proverbs are proverbs we have heard over a period of time, and we really don't know who the author is, but the person who gets credit for it is usually the person who puts it together. So there's a strong possibility that this psalm might be Davidic, as some people believe. Davidic psalm, and they believe it's a Davidic psalm while he was in exile. Now, Psalm 42, which is what we're going to study, is in two parts. Verses 1 to 5 is clearly one part, that which we'll study this evening, and verses 6 to 11. But some people believe that Psalm 43 might have been originally a part of the psalm. Psalm 43 only has 5 verses. And if you'll notice, at the end of 1 to 5, there is a refrain that is repeated in verse 11 and also repeated at the end of Psalm 43. So because of that, a number of scholars believe that 43 was once a part of 42. And if you remember that originally there was no chapters and verses, but they were put in later on, the possibility is great. Now, the psalm is addressed to the choir master, and here then is the title. Let's turn now to the psalm itself. In verse 1 it reads, "As a deer pants for the flowing stream, so pants my soul for you, O God." And here we have the psalmist crying out. First of all, the word pant is the word agar, and it says he's panting after a flowing stream. To pant is to go after, is to long for something. And probably the flowing stream might be identified by what we find in Joel 1 verse 20. A flowing stream that did not dry up even in the midst of time of drought. It reads like this in Joel 1:20. "Even the beasts of the field pants for you, because the water brooks are dried up, and fire has devoured the pastures of the wilderness." And what it's saying, that there were some streams in the desert that regardless of the drought, they did not go dry. And so the deer would go very far to find them. That is what they were seeking for. And here the psalmist is saying that just as the deer pants for the water brook, so pants my soul for God, for you, O God. Now, the word "so" is important because it's the Hebrew word ken, and it's an adverb stating the manner of the longing. So what it does, it is modifying the panting, and it therefore gives us a sense of intensity. So pants my soul, and this is a longing that cannot be filled by in any other way. You know, verse 2 says, "My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before him?" From this psalm, we take the line, "My soul thirsts for the living God." Now, the word "thirst" is the word tasami, that brings, it's a thirst that brings a suffering. It's an agonizing thirst. In fact, they will tell you that in the desert, when the men walk and the sandstorm was very strong, they usually have to something to put over their face, because if they don't, then the sand will get into their throat and almost choke them to death. And that's the time they are really thirsty. Well, this is kind of the same kind of idea, where the thirst is a thirst unto death. And I think Matthew 5 verse 6 is akin to this thirst. The word for thirst in Matthew 5 is the word dipsao, which is a Greek word. But let's listen to Matthew 5 6. It reads, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." And so one of the things we can say about the longing of the psalmist is that if you really long like how this long is, then you will be satisfied. There's a promise embedded in anybody who searches for God with all their heart, that God would respond. And you know what is interesting about thirst and hunger is that every man's thirst and hunger is not the same. There are some people say, "I'm hungry," and then they are satisfied by 2 biscuits. And there are some persons who say, "I'm hungry," and even after eating what my mother would say, Hannah and his calf, they are still hungry. So thirst is kind of varied depending on your appetite. And here the psalmist is really longing for God. Now, notice he says he's longing for the living God. That is significant. Because as you go along, you'll see that the living God is compared to something else later on. But let us look at that. Living in the context is in comparison to idols which are dead, who can do nothing. Living as in it the possibility of a relationship. Is longing for the God with whom he can interact, with God, which is longing for the God with whom he can talk with, and a God who can respond to him. And then living as it relates to a refreshing experience. Longing for the God that when you come out of his presence, you are refreshed. You would have remembered how Moses' face shone, having spent time with God. Then the verse says, "When will I come and appear before God?" Now, this seems to give us a hint that the person was prevented from entering the temple. And this is why some people believe it's David. They feel it's a David experience when David was in exile, running from Saul, and he missed the temple worship. And so the psalm was written at that time. Others think otherwise. But whether it is David in the exile, longing to be in the presence of the Lord in the temple, or it is somebody else, the idea here is that the person who's writing the psalm have a sense where they are distant from God. In our day, probably it wouldn't be that we are longing to go to the church, but there's some barrier between us and God. And the word that comes here gives us an idea of some of the things that prevented people from coming into the presence of God. Some people were not able to come because they were sick. Some people were too distressed to come. And of course, as we mentioned before, some people were in exile. They were out of the place where they could come and meet with God. I wonder if there's something keeping you from the presence of God. And I wonder if you have such a desire like the psalmist, that you are longing to get back into the presence of God, to be close to God. I wonder if yours is not a distance in terms of physical distance, but in terms of your spiritual distance, because there is a sin that is preventing you from coming close to God. The text tells us already that my iniquities have separating me from you. And I wonder if your sense of wanting to be in God's presence is because there is a sin. Now, listen to verse 3. It says, "My tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me all day long, where is your God?" Now, a couple things from this verse. First thing, my tears have become my food. I don't know if you can picture this. This person is longing to be in the temple, longing to be in the presence of God. Of course, you have to understand that in the Old Testament, God dwelt in the temple. And then here we have this hyperbole expressing the depth of the grief. My tears have become my food. Can you understand the intense grief that is there? The kind of grief that says almost as if I have completely lost the presence of God. I wonder if there are times when you feel that way, like you have completely lost the presence of God. And notice how it is intensified. He says, day and night. And day and night his tears become his food. And this speaks to the continual nature of the state of his mind. He's in such a state that all day long, all he's doing is panting after God, longing for God, longing to be in his presence, longing to interact with the living God who can give him a refreshment in his soul, a living God to hear from him and let God respond. I wonder if you ever come to a place in your Christian experience where God seems so far and distant, and you are crying and he still seems to be away from you, and you can't seem to penetrate. There's no satisfaction in your soul. I want to encourage you to continue to call after him. You know, in this text he says, while he's doing that, while he's in this state, men are jeering him and they are saying, where is your God? Where is your God? You know, that is a sarcastic question. It is a question of mockery. This is a mockery from those around. And do you know that sometimes when we have pulled ourselves away from the things around us and we are focused on God, we are doing our fasting, we are spending more time with God, we are spending more time in church, people then begin to jeer us and to mock us. And this, you have to know that this is a test of your faith. Because the evil one is always going to try to test you to see if you really mean what you are saying, to see if you really stand up and continue to search for God. Verse 4 read like this. These things I remember as I pour out my soul. Oh, I would go with the throng and lead them in the procession to the house of God with glad shouts and songs of praise, a multitude keeping a festival. And in this verse, we see some things. The psalmist is saying he remembers some things. And if we can categorize those things he remembers, two things are important in the verse. One is this: his presence among God's people. He's longing for this. And this is why I think more people think it's David who is prevented from coming to his house and prevented from coming into the capital city and prevented from going into the house of the Lord to talk with his God. And so his presence, he longed for the time when he could fellowship with the believers. And I don't know, maybe in COVID-19, some of us who have been locked down for these weeks are longing to see church again. And even some people who never used to go to church frequently, now because of the lockdown, you're longing to go to church again. You're longing for this social distance thing to pass, or physical distance thing to pass, so that you can interact with your brothers and your sisters. You can shake a hand. You can hug a person's neck. Here is the psalmist, and he's saying, I'm longing for the presence of God, and I'm longing for the people of God. And then he said something else. He says, I'm longing to participate in worship. Wow. Wow. I hope some of us are longing for that as well. There are some people who just come to church and they just take part and they go home and they are not involved in anything. I hope this time, as you reflect on God, as you reflect on the psalmist saying, part of what he enjoyed in the temple was being with the people of God, but part of what he enjoyed was also leading the procession, being actively involved in the work of God, actively doing what he could do to exalt his name and to give him worship. And then the text says, as I pour out my soul, here we find, here's a decision to give his all for the presence of God, the all to be in the presence of God, all when he's in the presence of God. And you know, sometimes when our service is given, it's half-hearted. Half-hearted. Some of us have so many opportunities to give service to the Lord, and we have to be pushed and pulled and dragged just to do a little thing. And here is a psalmist. And one of the things that is grieving the psalmist is that he's not able to participate, to give his all, to give his full 100 to the Lord. Interesting psalm it is. And we come to the verse 5, the final verse, and it says, why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you in a turmoil within me? Hope in God, For I shall again praise him, my salvation. This verse is repeated in verse 11. And this verse comes at the end of verse of Psalm 43. It is like a refrain. And this is why, again, it is believed that 42 and 43 forms one poem with 3 stanzas, and this being the refrain in those 3 stanzas. Now, if you're listening to the psalm so far, you could hear the mockery of the people on the outside. But now the challenge is on the inside. Because sometimes as we strive to come close to God, the things within us start to say, drag us down. Sometimes you might think of something you have done that has displeased God, and the devil say, oh, you can't give no service. Look what you did last week. Look what you did today. Look at the thoughts that went through your head. And that kind of make you want to pull back. But here, the psalmist, as he's cast down, he is doing some things in this verse. The first thing you realize is this is a rhetorical question. He's asking himself. The grammar is very, very deliberate to say it is something that is I am doing to myself. And sometimes our worship is affected by what we are doing to ourselves. The devil will bring to our minds some thoughts, and then we are doing it to ourselves. And because we have soiled our garments, and we have done things that we know we shouldn't do, it becomes very difficult for us, and we are struggling. But you know what is good about the verse is that the psalmist rebukes himself, and he rebukes this defeated attitude that he had. He is really talking to himself and say, no, no, he's not going to do that. He's going to hope again. And so not only does he rebuke himself, but then he encourages himself. He rebukes himself and he encourages himself. Why am I cast down? Hope in God. And then he acknowledges that God is the only person who can help him. Might I tell you that even if the evil one is at your ears and saying to you, what are you doing? What are you trying? You just did X. You just did Y. God don't have no use for you anymore. Don't listen to that voice. Be like the psalmist. Encourage yourself that you will hope again. Encourage yourself that God is not going to throw you out. Encourage yourself that if you are in a difficult place, God is the only person who can help you. Cry out to him. Because I want to tell you, as much as you want to be close to God, God wants to be closer to you yet. God wants to be intimate with you. And so here's the psalmist crying out. And I believe that the blessedness of Matthew comes to the fore. It says, if you hunger and thirst after righteousness, God is going to fill you. God is going to satisfy your hungry soul. I pray that you will not pull back, but that you will continue to call. So, as we come to a close, 5 things I want to remind you from this text about. The first is this: God is a living stream that refreshes and he never dries up. Any single time you turn to God with all of your heart, you will find that God will refresh you. That God can never dry up. You can always come to him. No matter how barren you are, you will find refreshment in God. Number 2, our longing, however, for God must be deep and sincere. It cannot be on the surface. It cannot be because something happened I just bowed to him. No. It must be a search that is beyond just an incident. Because I know sometimes when you mess up, we come away ball. No, that's not what it is about. It's about the continual calling day and night, where your tears become your food, where all you desire is that God be the center of your life, completely the center of your life. We must be willing, therefore, to give all. You can't give halfway. You have to give all. He says, I'm ready to be poured out completely. I hear that text when I hear Paul in the New Testament say, I'm ready to be poured out, to give up everything. Paul captures it in Philippians. He says, everything that I gain, I count but loss for the excellency of the knowing who God is. I want to know him, and I want to know the power of his resurrection. It's a giving of all. You know, by the way, when he said he searched for the living God, sometimes the gods we have, as Paul said in Philippians, he had to count them as refuge, uh, ref, as dung. And he didn't want those things to hold him back. So often the world tells us that we are important if we have certain things. And Paul came to the place where he said, all these things that made me something, I have to let them go. In this desperate search for who God is, and this desperate search for the presence of God where he might be close. And then 4, we must withstand all the tests, whether the test is outside or inside. Sometimes you're going on for God and somebody say, oh, you're going so holy. And you now begin to think about that. Or sometimes the struggles on the inside cause you not to go forward. And the last thing we must know is that we must stand against the inward struggles. We must stand against them. We cannot allow the devil to have his way. I trust that this Psalm 42 verses 1 to 5 would be a blessing to you and would encourage you to seek the presence of God in every